Good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, and it's a great pleasure and an honour to be here and to be able to be part of this meeting, to bring so many people together. It's a fantastic achievement, and very happy to be able to contribute to it in whatever way I can. We're going to be talking today. We've got a fantastic panel brought together. We're talking about putting parents' concerns and assets on the map, law, policy and advocacy. Now that's a great thing for 8:30 on Friday morning, isn't it? One of those wake-up sessions. So we're going to get our brains and our hearts into gear very soon. I'm going to just say a few words about each of our panelists, drawn from the information that you've got in your packs as well. And then I will just pull out a couple of points about what is this discussion that we're going to have, where might this discussion lead us. And then each of the panelists, I've asked them to say, just for a couple of minutes, something about their own experience. And then it'll be over to the floor for questions from you, for discussion amongst us, to pull out the concerns, the issues that we've got, and particularly to pick out the actions, the things we can do that can take us forward. So that's my little own map for the next hour, where that's going to take us. Okay, so I am going to start with Colleen, not to ask you to speak, but just because this is how I'm going to introduce people down the line, if that's going to be okay. So, first of the panelists is Colleen Wise, and she's from the US. She's a moderator on F.E.A.S.T Around the Table Forum. She's an engineer, an artist, an author, and an active member of her community. She's a mother of 3 children, and she says she considers her parenting her life's work. Okay, so that's Colleen. Next to Colleen, we have Bridget Bonin, and she's from Australia. She lives in the northern tropical part of Australia. She has 2 daughters studying science, and I learned that one of them was just about to marry an Englishman, so very good. Cultural bias, showing my cultural bias there. She works in cultural and environmental interpretation, which means she makes those signs and educational materials that you see in the national parks, all those interpretive signs. She really enjoys the outdoor life, and she also serves on F.E.A.S.T board. And then next to Bridget, we have Rachel. So Rachel Polonsky is from the UK. She's a member of F.E.A.S.T board as well. She's a writer and an academic based in Cambridge, which is about 60 miles from where I live, but we only met here for the first time yesterday. And that shows you how F.E.A.S.T works. It brings people across the Atlantic and then we meet here. So I say she's a writer and academic, and she's the mother of 4 daughters. And next to her is Maria Finnis. Now, Maria is also in the UK. She's a paediatric specialist registrar in Oxford, and the mother of 3 sons. And her special interest is in developmental paediatrics and neurodisability, including autism. And Rachel and Maria are sisters. That's another part of the story. Okay. So, that's our panel, and I think you'll agree we've got an awful lot of experience to draw on there. So, we're drawing on experience from 3 continents, 4 parents, 12 children. We've got 3 very different healthcare systems and political systems to talk about. But I think what we may discover is that on that global map we're talking about, we have much more in common than we may realise. And unfortunately, what we do have in common is we need to fight the illness and the system. Regardless of what system we're in, that's the fight. And that really shouldn't be the case, because it's tough enough to fight the illness. So our legal systems, in their different ways, they all address confidentiality, consent to treatment, mental capacity issues. Our government's policy agendas, they all include something about mental health provision and strategies that provide care. They do it in different ways. But it's the challenges that those systems and agendas raise that drive us forward in our advocacy efforts, and that's what we're talking about. And those might be national efforts, like the Freed Bill in the US, that most members of the audience might be familiar with, but also very local examples, and I'd like to begin by just sharing one that I'm aware of. And this is the story of Charlotte Robinson. Charlotte Robinson was from my hometown of Norwich in East Anglia in the UK. She was 18 years old when she died. her family moved heaven and earth to get her the treatment she needed. She had full access to our healthcare system. That wasn't the issue. What was the issue was that when her family doctor assessed her and said she needed urgent care, that file laid around for 4, 5, 6 weeks and nobody picked it up because nobody really knew what urgent care meant. And by the time she was admitted to the emergency room, urgent care wasn't even enough. At the inquest into her death, where her parents stood up in front of the judge who held that inquest and made the case for their daughter's life, 18 years old, it led to that coroner making a statement about how that care must change. And so now, across the whole of the county that we work in, urgent referral means this person must be seen within 4 days. That's now written into the policy statute for the way that care is delivered. That death has made a change. Those parents had to fight for it. Now, of course we can rejoice that from now on, anyone who needs urgent care will be assessed within 4 days, but it really shouldn't take the life of an 18-year-old girl to bring that about. Okay?
That doesn't sound fast enough.
It doesn't sound, no, it doesn't, but it's, you know, at least it's written down, yes, no, but that's where we are, you know, we have made some progress. It's not enough, but that's where we have. Okay, so that's just an example of how very local activism, one family working together, you know, despite all of those challenges and those difficulties, can bring about a change that affects everybody else's care in their locality. Okay, so that was just me giving some example of where we've come from. Okay. So, setting a bit of a scene for us at the national level or local level. So now I'm going to ask each of our panelists just for a couple of minutes, just to give us something about their own experience, very personal experiences we're talking about here, and then we'll open it up for the floor. Okay. So I promise I'm going to start at the far end of the table. Is that going to be okay? On Marie, are you going to be okay?
Rachel.
Rachel, Marie, okay.
Should I come there? Or
Wherever. You've got a phone, you've got a microphone there, so wherever you're most comfortable.
live stream and come up to the...
Excellent.
Well, I'm going to, encouraged by our speakers yesterday, begin with a personal story. My first conscious encounter with anorexia was when I was at high school, and I was in the last year of high school, and a girl in our year, whom I didn't know well, but we shared some subjects, became very, very ill, very, very suddenly with anorexia, and just disappeared from our social world and walked around the streets, and I just remember watching her become more and more emaciated and just thinking how strange it was, but not having any idea how to reach out to her and thinking, why can't they make her eat? What is it? Anyway, about 5 years later, I read in the local newspaper that she'd taken her life. And so when my own daughter, Hannah, became ill, in 2007, I was haunted by that girl from school. And as many of us were, isolated, terrified, desperate, reaching out for information and help in every possible direction and not finding the answers, only finding different forms of despair, really. We were living then abroad in Moscow, away from England, away from the UK health system. And we flew home and went to a local general practitioner in Oxford, where my parents live. And that's what you do in England. You don't go to a paediatrician. My daughter was then 14 years of age. You go to a general doctor and hope for the best. And the doctor said, that's fine, I treat lots of anorexics. Oxford's university town, there are anorexics all over the place, these high-powered A-type girls. I'll give her a good talking to. And she was a very kind, very intelligent, very good doctor. And we sat down, she didn't take us separately, my husband, my daughter and I, and she said, tell me about yourself, how many musical instruments do you play, what grade have you reached, do you get A's in all your subjects? Yes, yes, yes. My daughter fits the profile, the temperament that Walter Kay and others described yesterday, the perfectionist, the high achiever, slightly anxious type. yes, I get grade A's in everything. And then the doctor looked at me and she said, you need to take the pressure off. It's you I'm really worried about. So I was sitting there shaking like a leaf. And then she said, you're thin, you know, which my daughter translated into, you're not thin enough. And then she said, I'm not going to write down in her notes anorexia because, you know, I just don't think she's that bad. And just go away and eat. I know you say you don't like desserts, but just find things you do like to eat. And then she said to me very firmly, and stop watching her plate. Stop worrying and stop being the food police. And then as we were leaving, she said to my daughter, don't be an anorexic. I treat lots of anorexics, and just between you and me, they're not very nice people. So off we went, and the situation got rapidly worse. And I have to say, bless her, I think this general practitioner did harm on that day. We might have been better off if we hadn't visited her. The situation was getting more and more desperate, and I was, like many of you, spending nights on the internet and ordering every single book on Amazon. I just used to go click, click, one click, and they'd all arrive at my husband's office in Moscow, and he'd come home with these big brown parcels every day, and I'd stay up all night reading them. I can say 75% of them were bad, harmful books, which I happily threw into the recycling so that no one else would ever read them. And I gradually, I say as though it was a calm process, it was a desperate time, informed myself, and of course, as is the case with so many of us, Lockham Lagrange and Laura Collins's books stayed at the top of the pile. And I typed out that wonderful list of mantras that Laura has in the back of her book and stuck it up in huge type on my wall. But I hadn't really got the message about what Maudsley really meant, because I was being played for a fool by the eating disorder until the situation became really critical. And I think hospitalisation was just around the corner. And I realised that I was being lied to, food was being thrown away, not eaten, and so on, and I took charge. And I can say to you, from the other side, that recovery is real. We had a very difficult few months to wait restoration, and over the course of the next 4 years, my daughter has had no relapses and no hiccups really in terms of her physical health, and has become more and more mindful and recovered and empowered in her recovery, and to use the jargon, taking ownership of it, so that she's now very, very articulate from the other shore, from the place of recovery, and has been very encouraging about me coming here. And I have continued to be involved with F.E.A.S.T, which didn't then exist as F.E.A.S.T, but did exist as the forum, which I really, really think helped us to save her life more than anything. I never went back to that GP. My daughter's name will not be associated with anorexia on any official record. She won't become a statistic, which always makes me realise how difficult it is to assess any statistics about this illness. What can I say about my impressions of the health system? I can see the situation turning around quite quickly if people like that general practitioner really knew what they were doing and had been able to say to us, be afraid, this is a serious illness, there is something you can do. It may not work for you as a family, but it's the first place to start. In our family, it did work in many families, it does work in many families. It could work so well if there was the right kind of support from the system. And really, that's why I continue to be involved, although I don't want to go hugely public with our story at this point. But really to support that process, whereby we as parents can become part of what could become a very rapid turnaround in the health system, so that when people in desperation go to their doctors, they get good advice, not harmful advice. So that's really my position. I'm now back to teaching in the university, and of course encounter students who are also suffering, and it's been wonderful to be able to throw out the resource of F.E.A.S.T and that fantastic website where people can get so much information. And so I speak really from a position of great optimism and hope about what we can do as parents in cooperation with clinicians and scientists in really turning the situation around as fast as possible. Thank you.
Now we have Maria.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I'd just like to say that I think this conference has been a wonderful bringing together of so many different people with so many different perspectives and things to offer. First of all, I'd just like to say a little bit about my role, which is all very much in relation to Rachel's experience and story. I'm a hospital paediatrician. I treat children as inpatients with very medical problems, and I also now do neurodevelopmental paediatrics, mostly in the preschool population. So my professional experience of young people with eating disorders has really been restricted to those who come into the inpatient wards in critically unwell, medically unstable conditions. So already I have a very sort of skewed perspective of this as a disease. When Rachel's daughter became unwell, it brought home to me how little I knew about this disease, even as a paediatrician of several years already. It was a very humbling experience, really, to realise that to have to stand by and feel very helpless when, to see Rachel's huge suffering, her daughter's huge suffering, and to feel that there was very little that, as I, who should have been able to be more of a sort of professional guide to her, felt very helpless. And also to watch her be very let down by our system. And her daughter is very beloved by us all as a family. She's the first of our parents' grandchildren. And it was an extremely difficult and very desperate time for all of us. But we did all, I think, breathe a collective sigh of relief when Rachel discovered the forum and the books that obviously then we knew that things were going to get better, even from an early stage. I can say, even with hindsight, it's not just for the benefit of hindsight, I think we all knew then that things were going to be okay, even in those very desperate days. So it led me to think, why did the system let Rachel, her daughter, all of us down so badly? A system that I know very well, but works very well for many other conditions. This is a disease which I think came out very strongly in yesterday's talks. This is a disease which is very, very little understood, and doctors don't really like that. Doctors don't really like dealing with uncertainty, and they don't like giving a devastating diagnosis when they don't feel there's very much that they can offer. And I think this is one of the barriers that we as professionals need to think about. And what I'd like to do is just try and sort of, maybe this morning, trying to bring out what are the barriers to moving this forward, and how can we help to sort of push those barriers down. There are practical barriers like not enough child psychiatrists in the UK. Money is always going to be a huge barrier in the UK and probably in all of our health systems as well, in different guises. We don't have the insurance company problems, but we have the state provider problems. And training, and I think this is where this sort of a bringing together of people is going to be hugely beneficial and rewarding, because it's all going to be about education in the end. And as Rachel said, that general practitioner who had a good heart, she wanted to do the right thing, but just didn't have the education and training that was sensible and relevant. So I think that having a big, strong parent voice is going to be hugely advantageous, and is going to move this forward. Finally, I'd just like to say that a lot of my experience professionally now is with children with autism and their families. And my professional life so far has been a relatively short one. I found it wonderful to listen to Ruth Sullivan yesterday, and all of it, what she was describing was, yes, a long time ago, and yes, not very long ago at all. And yet, the experience that I have in dealing with children and their families with autism is that autism, yes, it's a devastating diagnosis, but we don't mind giving it because we know there's a lot that we can do and that there's a lot that can be done for these families and for these children. And this is a diagnosis now that opens doors for families. It takes away the stigma. It lets parents breathe a sigh of relief at some level that they're not being blamed for their children's behaviour, that it's not just behaviour, that it's not their parenting. And this is a diagnosis that opens doors for them. It gives them opportunities, it gives them resources, and it helps move things forwards. And I would like to think that that is somewhere where you're going to be, where we're going to be in a short professional lifetime, a little way away. Thank you.
Bridget.
Hi everyone. We live in a small regional city in very far northern Australia, so we're a long way from any capital city. And when our daughter was diagnosed with an eating disorder in 2004, we were quite concerned about where we might go for help. We struck problems right from the beginning of getting a diagnosis. We went to a couple of doctors and a dietitian before we actually got a diagnosis of an eating disorder. Even with the dietitian, we saw over a 2-week period, and our daughter lost a couple of kilograms at 14 between appointments, and even then the dietitian never mentioned an eating disorder to me, even though we'd come to her because we were concerned. The first doctor we saw told us that, talked to my daughter about the dangers of getting an eating disorder and the concern about it, a little bit like Rachel, but didn't diagnose an eating disorder. And eventually we went to a sports doctor about a sports injury, and he diagnosed depression initially, and after a couple of weeks of seeing my daughter diagnosed an eating disorder. And we started treatment with him and a dietitian, and we got a counsellor who at one point was seeing my daughter four times a week. And despite this team together, her condition just deteriorated and deteriorated, and her weight dropped and dropped and dropped. So we called in a paediatrician. I have a medical family, so I pulled strings and tried to sort of jump the queue and got an appointment with a paediatrician as well to bring him onto the team. And even with that group of people, her daughter's condition still continued to deteriorate. We were encouraged to, encourage her to eat, but we weren't given any real information about how to go about that. She reached a point where she was going to be hospitalised, and the GP offered us the alternative of giving her a nasogastric tube at night at home. So we took that option and kept her at home, and for 5 months she was fed with a nasogastric tube at night and was still very ill. And we reached, the doctor, who was a GP, just a general practitioner, reached a point where he said, I don't think I can really help you anymore. And we then went to see another group of therapists. We saw a doctor who tried a lot of medications. We went to an occupational therapist who tried her thought was perhaps if we could get Kelly to be more social, we might be able to improve her condition. She actually wanted us to negotiate, with Kelly, saying, if you can eat a bit less if you go out and have picnics with your family or do things out. And then we went and travelled to see a very leading doctor in the field, and we got the same story of take the pressure off. So we were at a point of desperation. She'd been sick for nearly a year by this time. We'd been managing to just keep her at a reasonable weight so that she wasn't ending up in hospital, but she was fighting us tooth and nail. She was desperately ill, didn't go to school. We did have the opportunity in Australia, you can have, on medical grounds, you can have your child homeschooled, and so we introduced homeschooling, and she continued to do her schooling, and she got A grades all through her schooling, despite the fact that she was desperately ill. And then eventually we heard about a new doctor in town who happened to be an Englishman who was over doing a year's sabbatical in Australia. And he was working for our government-run child and youth mental health service. And he had seen a lot of children with anorexia come into his surgery, and the only treatment that was offered at the time was to send them down to Brisbane, which I can't tell you how many miles away, but it's about an 18-hour drive away. And they'd go to hospital in Brisbane, they'd stay for a couple of months, they'd be refed a bit, they'd come home, and then their weight would drop again, and they'd be sent back down to Brisbane. And he thought there has to be a better way of doing this. And he'd heard about the Maudsley therapy that was being practiced in Sydney, down south of the country, and he brought a team up and had his team trained in Maudsley. And Kelly was the first child to go through that treatment up in our little regional city. And it was miraculous. It was really hard, she found it really difficult, we found it difficult, but we managed to restore her weight. And then after she'd been weight restored for about 6 weeks, we started to see changes in her. She smiled for the first time in 18 months. She let us sort of change out of, she was wearing daggy old tracksuit clothes, that's all she would let us wear for 18 months. She took them off and put on normal clothes. And then gradually, over a period of about 4 or 5 months, she started to, all the other behaviours, all her OCD-like behaviours just started to drop away. And she went back to school, and she wasn't 100% cured, but over the next couple of years, she had a few ups and downs, and now she's 21 and studying neurobiology and genetics at university, funnily enough, and doing very well, and about to marry an English boy. Laura's forum was an absolute lifesaver for us. We even when we started the Maudsley, the doctors were telling us what we had to do, but we didn't really know how. So we joined the forum and got some fantastic advice. And then I went from there to become a moderator on the forum, and then on the F.E.A.S.T board. And Carolyn Gray, another F.E.A.S.T board member, and I started the Australian task force for F.E.A.S.T, which has been sort of sporadic activity on that because life takes over in other ways. But we're in quite an exciting time in Australia at the moment. The federal government has provided a big lump of money to do a complete review of how eating disorders are treated in the country, and they've actually invited carers to be part of that review. And when this sort of first was floated, I thought it might be fairly token, the input from carers, but in fact it's been terrific. And this review is looking at, they've done a review of all the treatment options available and tried to assess their, on an evidence-based level, how they rate. And they're really trying to develop a framework for how eating disorders will be treated in Australia. And all the documents that are being produced, if any carer who is interested has the opportunity to comment on those documents. So my main work this year really for F.E.A.S.T has been to work through these quite hefty documents and try and provide as many comments as we can. At the last meeting for the National Eating Disorders Coalition, that's what this, collaboration, that's what this group is called. One of the clinicians came up to me afterwards, and I was just talking to him, and he said, listening to carers has really changed the way I treat my patients. And I thought, that's fantastic, that they're actually, we do have a voice, and if we can get up there and speak, we can make things change. As far as sort of the things that are difficult in Australia, I think we don't clinicians, we need better training for our clinicians right from the time that they start at university. I come from a medical family, and I know my relatives have said that they had a token, this is going back quite a few years, but they had very token training in eating disorders, didn't really know anything much about it. I couldn't get a lot of help from my medical family when Kelly was sick because they didn't know anything about it either. And I think so better training for our clinicians would really help, and again at the base level, at the GP level, would be fantastic if people knew what to do and how to help better. We have an advantage in Australia that we have a two-tiered health system. We have a public system and a private system, and our public system is completely free. It's funded by, we pay a Medicare levy on our salary, so when your salary reaches a certain level, you pay 1.5%. So if you earn more, you contribute more into a public health system. So our entire family-based treatment, the Maudsley treatment, which Kelly was attended there for about 18 months, was completely free. We paid nothing for that at all. But we do also have a private system that is a voluntary system. You can have private insurance if you choose, and it allows you to choose your own doctor. You can move into a private hospital rather than stay in a public hospital when you become ill. But basically, anyone rolling up to an emergency department can go into the hospital system, have operations, whatever, for nothing and pay nothing. So we have some advantages, but we still face the same problems. We have the same stories, particularly young adults, who there doesn't seem to be very much in Australia for young adults. The eating disorder collaboration seems to be pushing Maudsley family-based therapy, supporting it strongly. And it seems to be becoming slowly more widely available in Australia. But young adults, there still seems to be a large gap in how they're treated. So there's a lot of work to do yet. Thank you.
I'm so bummed I don't have an accent. My daughter Hannah, also Hannah, her little trip to hell started ironically at church when she participated in a 30-hour famine to raise money for starving children in the third world. We didn't realize that at the time. We didn't put the pieces together for about a year and a half, but looking back, we could pinpoint the date. We could put a date stamp on when she got sick. She was a very normal, healthy, emotionally flexible, very great, well-adjusted social kid before she got sick. She does not fit the profile of anxious, OCD, or perfectionistic. So I was actually very aware of anorexia because of my mom, because of my brother, and was watching the wrong child because of that profile. I was watching my younger daughter, who does fit that profile, and there went Hannah. I did not recognize what was going on. She lost weight, we could see that, but, she was busy. She wasn't always at dinner. She was working. She had friends. They were going out for dinner, she said. And it wasn't until, this was at the end of February that this started, and it was Cinco de Mayo, May 5th, when my younger daughter came to me and said, "Mom, I heard Hannah throwing up after dinner." And the scales fell from my eyes, and I said, "Abby, you just saved Hannah's life." And I sprung into action and thought I would just throw open the windows and shout, "Help, help, eating disorder," and help would come rushing in. And that didn't happen. In fact, Hannah had just been to her pediatrician for her annual exam about a week earlier, and they had noticed the 20-pound weight loss, but asked her questions that she, of course, didn't answer truthfully, and let her go home, and never contacted me. And I asked, what did the doctor say about your weight loss? And he said it was fine. Anyway, sprung into action, started trying to find help, couldn't find help. Called therapists, just started with people that I knew, asked for referrals. They would give me each about 4 referrals. I would call those people. I don't work with adolescents. I don't work with eating disorders. I can get her in 6 months' time. I'm, full, whatever. And I just could not find help. Our local county mental health services does not do eating disorders. Our hospital doesn't know anything about them. They think this other hospital has a program. No, they closed that down. I couldn't find help. I found a therapist in my area who had heard of Maudsley, because the more research I did, the more I thought, this makes really a lot of sense. Now, I knew about eating disorders because of my mom. And I knew that they were caused by controlling parents, and that they were a choice, and that they were driven by the media and things like that. That's what I knew before my daughter got sick. And so I knew that I was not a controlling parent. And can I just say right now, you know what I'm going to say, Sonia. I am a good parent. I'm actually a really good parent. I will not stand up here and apologize for my parenting, and I won't add a qualifier like, I'm not a perfect parent. Okay, I'm not even going to say that. I'm a really stinking good parent. And I would add that now that I've helped my daughter through anorexia, I am an extraordinary parent. Anyway, so all I can say is I could not find help. I found a therapist who had heard of Maudsley. And of course, Maudsley appealed to me because I am a controlling parent. And it made a lot of sense to me. I'm a scientist and an engineer, and so that totally made sense. I look back and see my join date on the Around the Dinner Table forum as just very soon after Hannah's diagnosis. And all I can say is God works through Google. I had Googled parent forum anorexia, and up popped Around the Dinner Table. And it was amazing. It was amazing. I give it full credit for being that impetus and everything that brought us to the point where, when I could not find help, gave me some hope and some light. So that was great. Unfortunately, I still believe that she had to want to recover, and that she had to do this on her own. And we were getting that feedback from the therapist that we had found too. And within 2 weeks, she was in the hospital. And not our local hospital, because they didn't know, but to our hospital in Seattle, which has the only eating disorders unit in the state. And she was not in the psych unit, she was in the medical unit to be stabilized because her heart rate was dropping below 30. She was very ill, and I'll also say that she was not super skinny. I know we're not going to talk about numbers here, but her BMI did not drop below 18.5. She went from a normal healthy weight to not a scary weight. It was the rate of weight loss that was just so precipitous. It was only 10 weeks from the time she started to starve until we figured this out. And so based on a lot of hospital criteria, she would not have been admitted or given a diagnosis. She barely fit the DSM criteria. Although I would say her period stopped immediately. So she was at the weight she needed to be when she started. In the hospital, I asked my husband, who was ferrying pajamas and toothbrushes back and forth, if he would stop at the library and pick up some books on anorexia. And he came back and he said, these are the only two that look any good, and he had Locke and Lagrange, and he had Eating with Your Anorexia. Pretty awesome. Yeah. I was so happy. I stayed with Hannah in the hospital for 9 days until her heart rate went above 40. And I was so happy to be there because I thought, at last, a gate has opened, and we have a team, that beloved team that Locke and Lagrange talks about. That I thought, where does this team come from? I can't find this team. They're not out there. And now I had a team, because Children's knew about eating disorders, and I could use them as an outpatient through their adolescent medicine clinic, and that's what we did. And they practice what they call modified Maudsley, which means that you go home and feed your child, and then you drive them to the appointments and wait in the waiting room. Well, they talk to your child, and the eating disorder triangulates everything, which is exactly what happened. She would meet with her nutritionist, she would meet with her doctor, and we would all just not be on the same page whatsoever. And I could not get them on my page. I wasn't willing to go to their page, and it ended very disastrously with an appointment where they did a body fat composition on her. She heard the message that she was fat, that her mom was making her fat, that her mom was not following professional advice. She wouldn't go with a very, very slow weight gain, and Hannah came out of that and said, I will never eat for you again. So let's see, we had about 2 months of refeeding, and we were probably 15 pounds short of her target range. And I thought, the world has come to an end now. What can I do? And she would not eat for me. We upped her therapy appointments to like 3 times a week. And I mean, she did it. She did feed herself to a healthy weight. But to say that she was recovered because she could eat is, and here I kind of hesitate to say anything because, sorry. I feel like when I started to say that my daughter was hostile, people have jumped to the conclusion that she's a teenager. What did you expect? You did something that she didn't want to do. You fed her and she didn't want to be fed. And it was not like that. I want to say it was like psychosis. It was like anorexia about me instead of about food. Okay. I am a very intelligent person. I used to be a professional engineer, and I did not check my intelligence when I left the field and became a mother. I'm an intelligent mother. I have other children. I know what teenagers are like, and this was different. And it needed treatment. And we were in therapeutic no man's land. And I could not get our therapist to come on board with, let's do exposure therapy with me. No, it's relational. Okay, could we do FET basically with me instead of food? This doesn't make sense. And we couldn't do it. So we ended up kind of doing it ourselves, kind of home therapy, we'll say, for exposure. And did things to try to manipulate her in a way to interact with me and do things with me. It took 4 months to get her to eat at a table with me again. And that was a good trick, actually. I'll share that with you. It was Thanksgiving. And we thought, because she hadn't eaten at a table with me since August 7th, and we will invite our friends from out of town, our friends with the really cute 20-year-old son. And she may be crazy, but she is rational enough to know that this looks weird. And she did everything that you would do with food with me. She said, let's have the kids eat in the kitchen at the kitchen table, and have a kids table and an adult table. All this negotiating, just like with food. And no, we got the big table, we can seat 12, but it'll be more fun. No, and in the end, she did eat with me, and every time she made a step forward, she was able to continue that progress. It still took another 5 months before she was able to speak at the table while I was there, while there was both food and me present. So it was a very slow process, and it took about a year after full weight restoration before I felt like emotionally she was recovered. The turning point was a long exposure therapy I invented of going to Cannon Beach, Oregon, and staying in a beach house, just the two of us, which we both dreaded. That my pastor, who was a huge support to me, I was in his office, scared and telling him, I'm so freaked out about this weekend with Hannah, and he told me, just stay in the present, don't take the history, live each moment, etc. And my phone rang. It's my daughter's therapist who said, Hannah just left the office. She's really freaked out about the weekend. I told her, just stay in the moment, don't take the history. And having that time together in Cannon Beach, which is beautiful. Time to walk on the beach, poke around the shops, and the magical ingredient was the knitting shop. We went in the knitting shop to find a bathroom, and she fell in love with these hand-knitted socks. And we bought needles and yarn, and it gave me a chance to sit close to her, because at this point she had touched me once in the year that she was ill, and that was only because I told her I'd have a hard time paying for college for a kid who couldn't hug me on graduation day. And so she gave me this kind of hug. But the knitted socks, it made her sit close to me so I could help her with it. It helped her to see I'm still that parent that's patient and loving and kind. And we knitted socks, but mostly we knitted up our relationship. And so, to speed it up, I'm sorry. Okay, so let me get to the part about advocacy, because I have a tendency to complain a little bit. So, when we were at the hospital, and I was really frustrated with this whole modified Maudsley thing, once we were safely free of our grip on children, because we were afraid to let go of it, it was the only lifeline we had. When we found help elsewhere, I went back and contacted the ombudsman there and told them about our frustrations with being excluded from treatment, not having access. The law of consent for mental health issues in Washington State is 13. And so they weren't giving me information, at which point I said, this is a medical condition, she's not here for psychological things, and had to threaten lawsuits, and was able to get her weight and basic information like that. I think it worked because other people have come behind me and said they were able to get that information, so that's good. When she left for university, I had her sign every release. She was over 18 at this point, and I still had to fight the university to get information from the Student Health Service. I really love the forum, and I love being a moderator, and I keep track of new members, and when I see people in my Seattle area join the forum, I contact them privately by email. I cross boundaries probably, but I reach out to people, to parents, because I remember what it was like to throw that window open and not know what to do. And I will email people privately and get email responses back sometimes, maybe half the time. And it always amazes me when I do, because I think I'm just some weird stranger on the internet. But they write back to me, and we now have a group that gets together about once a month. There's about a dozen of us. And it's really powerful, I think, to get together in person as it is here, and to have that resource for parents to get the support they need is very impressive. So that's, I don't know.
Well, I think you'll agree, we've heard some very powerful stories there this morning that, as I do, range across the globe, but actually pull out some very common themes. I particularly noted this point about training for professionals, making sure that people at all parts of the system really understand it. And I know in the UK, one of our campaigning points is for those general practitioners to get up to date and up to speed, because they may have been trained a very long time ago. They may have drawn their inferences, we've heard that yesterday, from outdated theories and practices. People need to get up to date with the latest stuff, because there's some really good evidence out there now. We need to see that being used. Okay, so, is this one I want to watch? How's that, yeah? No.
No, it takes a second.
It takes a second. How we do it? No. Carrie will do it. I'll ask, anybody got a question or an observation or something that they want to say at this point while we get the mic to work? You can just stick your hand up and then we can bring it out.
Is this good?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, does anybody have anything they would like to say? It's not that... Laura does. Matt didn't walk up here and use this mic because this one doesn't fit the audio.
You can hear me.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things about a panel like this is the money issue, because one of the struggles for F.E.A.S.T and something I want to hear from all of you about is because I'm American and I kind of take an American attitude. We have a lot of Americans, obviously, in our group. But we need to, I think, be and stay international. But the financial issues are very different depending on what system, or in our case, lack of system we have. So how can we meet the needs or reach out to parents around the world when we have such different financial systems? Should we be dividing up our work by country, or should we keep it international? And I mean, really a huge range of experience for parents accessing care.
Okay, anybody on the panel like to pick up that point straight away? My instinct would be go with the issue, because the money follows the issue. If you can make the case that people deserve, need, want right now, money will follow that. I think to divide along, oh, we can't do this because of insurance, or we can't do this because of government, is what they want us to do. They want to divide us in that way. I would stick with the issue.
I just wanted to say,
From a UK point of view, but I'm sure this is global, there isn't enough money in our National Health Service for anything, and so everything has to provide a very good case if you want to have money with it. I think that is where the work of the scientists that we heard yesterday is going to be so crucial. The evidence has to be there before governments will put money into it. Evidence of good outcomes, evidence of early intervention. This is part of the reason that a lot of money is now going into autism, and I think that is going to be, because it's been proven that early intervention improves outcomes and in the end saves money. And if governments in our system are going to be ruled by their purses, and that's where the evidence has to be very key.
Bridget? I guess my answer to that would be, although money is a huge issue, and it's obviously for American citizens it's much more difficult with your insurance. But as for dividing things on the way we do work, so many of the problems are still the same. And even though money is one issue, and maybe we just have to talk about that differently in the different countries, but there's still a core of things that are still the same in all the countries.
I think in the U.S. there's just so much variety in healthcare plans, and from state to state what's covered, and we were really lucky that we had good healthcare insurance, and we were lucky that we did not spin our wheels going to expensive residential treatment centers. Not that they are a bad thing, but just that our insurance would only pay for 21 days, which isn't very much. That's probably £5. And so we were lucky. I think that Americans have to come from both the top down and the bottom up. The parents who need the support and the money have to lobby and work and get their insurance to pay, and the more that happens, and the more insurance companies pay, the more precedent there is for paying, and the change comes from both directions.
Yes, well, the systems are so different. Just taking that brochure from the learning room yesterday, which has 400 extremely attractive residential facilities for eating disorders. There's nothing like that in the UK. We're all falling back on a system, but there's an advantage there in the kind of advocacy we're doing, because it really does save money if the GP can give the right advice right at the beginning. But the problem in the UK is that there's this enormous gap between the GPs, and there's nothing really offered to parents in between that and hospital, and there's an incentive in the system to keep people out of hospital, and yet there's not the knowledge and education about how to do that. So a lot of people should be in hospital and they're not getting to hospital. The threshold in the UK is very, very...
Tell us what it is.
I think the NICE guidance would cover that, and NICE is the National Institute of Clinical Excellence, which in the UK issues guidelines on a complete spectrum of illnesses and mental health problems. I think that the criteria for admission to hospital are included in that, and I wouldn't like to say them off the top of my head, but once there's guidance out there.
Tell us. I
Are we allowed to use the number? It's an AMI of 12, is it?
No.
No? 14.
13.5.
I think there's talk of flowing.
Okay.
Heart
Yeah.
rate. There are the criteria too.
Okay, well, I was part of the NICE guidelines development group, so I was on the committee that came up with those recommendations, and they did look at BMI, and they did make recommendations on either urgent or emergency care, but the clinicians on the ground are driving that further down. So NICE guidance says 17, okay, and that's the point at which you would consider treatment.
But that's treatment, not therapy.
I know, exactly. But then on the ground, people are saying, oh, actually, if we took it that way, we're talking about 14, we're talking about 13. So on the ground, they're driving it down. It's not the NICE guidance that's driving it down, it's the clinicians on at the level where they're spending the money.
Issue.
And that's a resource issue. So that is a point about, you've got to work at the policy level, but you've also got to drive up from the practice. Colleen's point, parents have got to push up from their end, and organisations and entities have got to drive down the top as well. Yeah. Okay. We are out of time. Can we have a minute?
With your permission?
Yeah.
With your permission. Okay. Can I give Mary Beth the floor?
I was pink yesterday. I'm purple today. Everybody here has brought up their pediatrician, primary care doctor. And I'm not a microphone, you can hear me. I've been coming to meetings through NIDA, through the AED, since 2004. And I'm the one that's trying to find our common ground. And so finally, what I came to is that we can't argue about not killing people. So I went to the Academy of Eating Disorders and I said, can we create a booklet for primary care physicians that gives everybody at least enough information not to kill anyone in an emergency room or from their office, and also to have enough information to make an appropriate referral and know enough to stabilize a patient. And this is what's come out of that. This has now been endorsed by the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Psychiatric Association, Society of Adolescent Health and Medicine, the Canadian Society of Pediatrics, and we're working with AED to do all of these sister organizations to do this. It's being translated into Spanish and French right now. Steffi's here. I was hoping they're going to translate into German. We're going to work with the other sister organizations and have it translated into other languages. Laura and I spent time at the Academy of Pediatrics in Boston and handed this out. The good news was that young residents and medical students are getting some training. They said, I wish I had this last week, but I was in adolescent rotation. So it's down and dirty. It's what your pediatrician can read in 15 minutes. It gives them the numbers and a test to look at. It gives them enough information just to stabilize and make a referral. So I have 2,000 copies here. We have a request for over 1,200 already. If you fill out a mailing label, I'll mail them to you. I'm Cookie Mom. I've become Booklet Mom. I said to the AD, if I can be Cookie Mom, I can be Booklet Mom. So I have 7,000 of these in my garage. So we have distributed. We need these to get to each doctor. You can take a pile with you today, or you want some shipped to you, we will take care of that.
Woohoo!
Thank you. And that's a great point to end on, because that's a perfect example of how the passion and the drive of one parent, one family, can really bring about change across the nation. I mean, Mary Beth was too modest there. That initiative was down to her. Her drive, her dollar, her enthusiasm. We raised about $17
$17,000. We still haven't spent, we have about half of that left for mailings. People can still donate to the cause, but people came forward with a lot of money very quickly, even just on the F.E.A.S.T site. You know, Laura put it out one day and money was coming in. So, you know, it was a really, really amazing effort and a group effort. And money, we have something that we can all come to agreement and consensus on, it will be supported, is what I will say. And don't do that again, okay?